And just like that, with a click of the button, we are here live with my good friend, Jon Reed. Good friend. And we're going to talk, the only two things we're talking about, religion and politics, and the third thing being movies. So, Jon, good to have you on the podcast, my friend. It's been a long time since we've done a podcast together.
It really has. It's got to be like over 2 years, so it's good to be back.
Yeah. So let's give a little background because this will be on my philosophy podcast, and you haven't been on this one before, so we should do some stage setting. We've now been friends for many, many years, and sort of in an interesting way, we met at my wedding. I really had no idea who you were before. So, but you were at my wedding. I didn't know you, but I hardly knew you. I think we met briefly one time, and then we met at my wedding. We became good friends after that, and then if people who are familiar with me, you already kind of know Jon in an indirect sense because you know him as the guy who helped me film all my kettlebell videos. So whenever you see my better produced fitness stuff, you have Jon to thank for all of that. And we would always have great conversations about many different things, behind the scenes of those kettlebell videos. And then I was best man at your wedding not too long ago, so it kind of came full circle a little bit.
Yeah, just I think that was the super spreader event that had set off the whole COVID Omicron thing. So.
Yeah, you have Jon to thank for the lockdowns in Pennsylvania after that. Yeah,
that's right. Well, actually, surprisingly enough, Wolf did not do anything drastic during that whole time period. So got to give it to him. I think the legislature in Pennsylvania intimidated him. Like they basically took away his emergency powers. So he didn't do anything after that. I guess he got the message.
Yeah, good. Yeah, as and rightfully so. So yeah, wedding wasn't too long ago. It's actually it was in September, right? So it's been a couple of months.
End of September, yeah.
End of September, and so let's talk about you a little bit, Jon, because I know we want to talk about religion and God and tie it into some Woody Allen movies just to make it fun. And you actually, Jon, you've known me long enough now that you kind of you sort of watched me move into that spooky cult of Catholicism. You remember that, right? You knew
the Child Molesters Club.
Yeah, he's going to trigger some nice comments here in just a minute, right? Because you were there, right? I mean, so like we had a lot in common, and we've been friends for a while. But you sort of just watched as I sort of made that, I guess, that philosophical journey from being not religious to religious. But you yourself have made a number of moves because you were for a long time, I think, a self-described like militant atheist, and now you've kind of moved into more of an agnostic view on a lot of things. So describe that to us. Just give us a little bit of background before we start diving in.
Well, I think we talked about this in private, but my experiences with religious people, particularly Christians, has always been, if I told them that I was an atheist, I didn't believe in God, they would say, why? And I'd say, well, the onus is on you. And so you prove to me why there is a God. And they would always say, well, look around you. Or they would say, because the Bible says this or the Bible says that. And I always just said, well, that's not good enough for me.
Yeah, I don't take the Bible seriously. So why? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, why would that be some kind of authority on my worldview? So I never really got into that. And so like when you talked about converting to Catholicism, I was sort of like, okay, here we go. But then
he's losing it.
Yeah, exactly. The more conversations we had, you always explained it to me from a perspective that I hadn't really heard before. So it was like a philosophical journey in search of the truth. So that was, and you would always, explain to me about the philosophy behind Catholicism and Aquinas, and you would educate me on all this stuff. And I thought, well, okay, if I had gone through my life with people trying to convince me this way, or to talk about it this way as, just sort of trying to find out the true meaning of life, or the true origins of the universe, or things like that, that would have made me not so resistant. Because we talked about this before, like my militant atheist days where I was very much like those annoying atheists who try to sue the school board for, having under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, or try to, make it their life's work to get "In God We Trust" off the dollar bill or something like that. So I always was one of those annoying people, but then, I slowly got to realize that it's really not an imposition on my life whatsoever, that you believe one way and I believe another, or somebody else believes one way. I mean, as long as there's no violence involved, or they're not trying to impede forcibly on my life, what do I care what anybody believes? Like, I live perfectly fine, and there are Scientologists in the world. So I don't see how one belief system encroaches on my freedom any more than another. So, but going back to what I was saying, like, the more talking it out, the more trying to find philosophical meaning behind existence was really more interesting to me than, I grew up as a Christian and I have the Bible and I went to church fairly regularly, so I'm just a Christian. So, and
Right.
if you're not, then I don't know. I don't understand your belief system, but the world exists and the Bible exists, so you're stupid for not believing.
Right. I don't know how much you've talked with Christine about this. Christine, for people who don't know, is my wife, and she was born in the South, so a deeply sort of Christian culture, but she was brought up with no religion. She was never baptized. She was her dad was kind of a hardcore agnostic, and so I think she actually had a sort of similar experience with you, where she was really put off by Christianity in general, sort of the Southern Protestant Christianity, for many of the same reasons. One's was just like flagrant, like threats of random threats of hellfire, right? But the other is like this sort of like deep circularity, like, well, why do you believe in God? Because the Bible says so. Well, why do you believe in the Bible? Well, because well, it's in the Bible, right? And it's like, well, if I don't take the Bible seriously, that isn't very helpful to me, right? And I agree, John. Like, if that was the only thing that I was ever presented with as a case for God or Christianity, I would not be where I am right now, right? It just is supremely unsatisfying. But going back to you, were you actually, because I remember you telling me this story one time, and I found it interesting, because my atheism was not like a new or militant atheism when I was an atheist. Like, for me, it was just trying to get the world right, and it just seemed for a while that I could do it from a sort of reductionist standpoint. Unlike you, like, I never even really had many encounters with religious people or Christians, right? For whatever reason, like, most of the religious people I knew growing up were pretty private, right? I can't remember, honestly, like, ever in throughout all my life, like, ever like being evangelized. You know what I mean? It sounds like you had some of those encounters. I don't think I ever came into one of those situations that I can remember. So I guess my kind of atheistic background was different from yours in that sense. But were you one of those people, or were you just around those people for a while? Because I remember you told me at one point that you used to go to sort of the atheist meetup groups, and like, it annoyed you that like their mission in life was just to change the Pledge of Allegiance, and that caused you to eventually separate from them. How much did you actually partake in that before you realized, yeah, maybe this is just a different cult, but it's not free of cult behavior, right?
That's pretty much it. I mean, I didn't go to many of them. I probably went to maybe 5 at the most. And the reason I went there is because I was one of those people who I was actually, like, ironically, I follow the science person, and so if their science exists, therefore I can disprove your old man with the beard in the sky waving his hand, and the earth comes about. So I don't know why, but I mean, maybe everybody needs that purpose in life. So maybe at the time that was my purpose in trying to disprove to anybody I encountered who was a Christian, saying, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? And so the reason I went to these meetup groups is I wanted to kind of find like-minded people and see what they were like, and what they did with their time, and how they focused their atheism on the world. And again, it was a lot of these. Well, did you know under God wasn't even in the Pledge of Allegiance until 1956 or something like that? And the things about the "In God We Trust" and the 10 Commandments on the walls of a courthouse. And I just realized, I don't know what really clicked in my head, but it's sort of like, why are you burning so many calories on this? I mean, how does this affect your life? Because I'm thinking about it, and like, "In God We Trust" on my money doesn't really affect me one way or the other. I mean, as long as my money works, as long as I can buy things with it, I don't really care if it says, if they put "Praise Fauci" on it now. I would still spend it in the same way. Another religion, by the way.
That might be coming up here.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it was just, I found people who spent a lot of energy, and it was the same kind of energy I kind of disliked about who I perceived as, religious in the traditional sense. They would go to church and they would talk about hellfire and damnation and things like that. And, eventually the atheism thing just turned me off in the same way that any other religion. And the ironic thing is, they didn't see their behavior as any sort of religious behavior. I mean, they replaced God with science or non-belief or something like that. But
politics or something.
Yeah,
else,
exactly.
Right?
They had an object to put in their faith or to put meaning in their lives, but it just wasn't God, but it was the exact same behavior. And it was ironic to me, and that I could see it, but I could see it after a little bit. And these people who had devoted their entire lives to this sort of thing still carry on as if they're not part of some cult.
Right. Yeah. That's and by the way, gentle listeners, Jon is not only a great friend of mine, but he's somebody that I hold as extremely honest and intelligent, such that whenever I'm writing on religion, I often force Jon to read my stuff. Just be like, "Jon, am I deluding myself here? Like, just give this a read." And just because I know he'll give me an honest, straightforward answer, and he's got kind of no dog in the fight. So he's always one of my go-to guys for that. Now, all right, let's talk about this then, because I think you've come to realize, like I've realized, is that everybody kind of has a religion in a sense, right? If you just define religion broadly as like ultimate commitment in life, if this is what I'm gonna like, this is just gonna be my supreme guiding principle, whether it's God or Fauci, right? It seems like something kind of like assumes that top role.
Yeah.
And then you can say like, okay, well, none of those is legitimate, or maybe some of those are, or maybe one thing is legitimate and everything else should be sort of subordinated. But for me, Jon, if you remember, because this was over the course of a number of years, and I'm just thinking back, wow, we've been friends for a lot more years now than almost 10 years, I think, right?
When did we go to California? It was 2014, I think.
Okay, so just under 10 years. Yeah, mine was a largely sort of gradual philosophical journey where there were just certain aspects of the world that seemed undeniably true to me, right? And if a theory couldn't explain those aspects, then that theory be damned, right? And what are some of these aspects? Well, it seems like I'm a rational agent, and I really do at least have freedom of the will in some significant sense. It seems like there's an objective moral structure to the world. It seems like the universe is not a self-explanatory fact, and all these different considerations, right? Which I know we've talked about many different times. And so gradually I just came to see by reading like intelligent philosophical theists that a theistic worldview can make sense of all the things that I think need to be made sense of in a way that a sort of reductive physicalist or atheistic worldview can't. And in fact, science is one of those things. Like why does science work, right? Why is the universe intelligible? Was one of those things that my precious, my precious pet here actually kind of made better sense in one paradigm than another paradigm. And sort of the atheistic paradigm, it just seems like it's just a really happy coincidence, almost a miracle that science works, right? I want to hear from you. What are some of the things that you think about a lot now? I think morality is one of them. So maybe this would be a sort of nice segue to crimes and misdemeanor that has maybe veered you away from atheism more toward agnosticism, and at least thinking, hey, maybe this God hypothesis isn't so crazy after all. Maybe this actually is a plausible worldview. Talk to us about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, you were, I mean, again, going back to the conversations that we had, you were you probably the only person who ever made the connection between science and the tradition in Catholicism. You know, the way that the Catholic Church actually helped science progress. So that was something I didn't really know about. But so it just, in the end,
real quick, did you ever read Tom Woods on this stuff? Because I know we're both.
I know he's got that book. What I can't remember.
How the Catholic Church built Western civilization.
Yeah. So I haven't read it, but I do know of it. So. But it wasn't so much the fact that or the notion that I was like convinced that there was a God, but it was more of along the lines of, this is a better argument than I've ever heard before. Thus, I really have to take a moral or intellectual inventory and say, well, I don't know, there's not a God, you know, so I have to leave myself open to the possibility that there is, but I'll probably never find out for sure in my lifetime. So I really won't know one way or the other until I'm dead. So it's up to me how I choose to live my life according to, you know, what I think of as moral principles. You say are derived from God. I have made the argument with you that it's probably more social evolution. So either way, I think it arrives at the same place, and that's all I care about in the end. Is you believe one way, I don't believe that same way, but we share the same value system. So that comes from somewhere. So whether or not it comes from God or from social evolution, ultimately we're not going to find out until we're buried 6 feet under. So it behooves me to be a little more intellectually honest and intellectually open about the possibilities that other people discuss.
Yeah.
You know?
And this is why I think we've always gotten along, because you've always struck me. We have another, I'm not gonna put the name out now. You've actually had some contentions with this person, Jon, who still is a flagrantly military atheist. There's an issue, I think, with you and his phone at a party one time, if you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And this was a type of person that you could never have this kind of conversation with, because it's just like the moment you even bring up the subject, just like all the emotions just flare up, and it's just like, no, there's just not going to be any. This is not going to be anything fruitful here. So let's just talk about, I don't know, video games or something. Right. So yeah, I mean, yeah, the evolution and morality one is interesting. The way I thought about this, and I want to get your thoughts on it, is, okay, are there competitive explanations here, or are there compatible explanations? Is sort of one way to think about it. Right. So one thing that I was sort of worried about as a naturalist was the classic Darwinian dilemma. And the idea is, does this really sort of undermine our deep moral intuitions, and especially our moral knowledge? Because our moral intuitions and a lot of our knowledge is sort of based on intuitions. We just have this deep sort of seeming that something is the case, right? Like it just really seems like 2 + 2 = 4. And so I believe it. It really seems like my knee hurts. And so I believe it. And it really seems like rape is just actually really wrong. And I believe it. Not just that I think it's wrong, but it is wrong, right? Okay. So then I start to wonder and worry if like an atheistic naturalistic worldview would sort of give me a defeater for that intuition being reliable, if that makes sense, right? And it's not hard to see how that would be the case. I mean, because you have call them many different patterns of evolution of animals that have survived and have these different characteristics and traits that promote their survival that we would think would be morally unacceptable for humans. Things like fratricide or severe inegalitarianism and stuff like that, right? So then you wonder, okay, is morality then something that I sort of project or invent, or is it something that I discover? And I think that to me was one of the greatest worries, where a naturalistic worldview couldn't give me the latter. You see what I'm saying? But it's the ladder that we need, right? It's the ladder that we need, right? No, it really seems like there is something actually in a binding sense wrong about rape and genocide. It's not just that like I don't like it, like I don't like blueberry yogurt, right? There's a qualitative difference here, right? And it seems like if evolution is just sort of aiming at survival value, then there could have been different patterns where we could have survived that's sort of unrelated to moral, like actual moral facts or moral truth. as we understand it. And then I guess there's two ways to think about it here, right? On a naturalistic worldview, like why should we even think that there are any moral facts at all? But even if we assume there are like moral facts that you can be correct about, why assume that evolution sort of guided us to the correct moral facts? You see what I'm saying, right? So like, even if there's moral facts, it seems like I have a defeat, or at least I even have moral knowledge, right? So these were the problems that were just deeply sort of accumulating for me on a piece of data that I thought needed to be explained, not explained away. That was critical. I need this explained, that I do have moral knowledge, that there are moral facts, and I can't explain this away. So I thought, okay, well, it seems like evolution itself isn't a problem, but evolution with atheism or naturalism is, right? Then it becomes competitive. But evolution with theism isn't competitive, it's compatible, right? And what I mean by that is if you just think God is sort of behind everything and he providentially governs the world, even through evolutionary processes, well, then it's not hard to see how God could guide us to the development of reliable intuitions and faculties, right? Presumably all of our faculties evolved. Sight, right? Like this is an evolved sense, but I really see a world outside of my head. And we could say the same thing about our moral intuitions, right? That we were just sort of evolved to detect this sort of objective moral landscape. So it seemed like I could keep all the science of evolution, which I wanted to do, but then with like a deeper sort of metaphysical shift, I could take what would otherwise be a competitive explanation and make it a compatible one. Does that even make sense what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
and your thoughts on all that? How does that make you feel, Jon?
Oh, well, I mean, it's a good argument. I mean, the only thing like that I would probably counter with is that, well, why you do feel an instinctual sense that, rape is wrong and murder is wrong. For me, I would not that this explains God away, but the counter argument to it would be that, okay, well, when societies were forming, it was probably very brutal, and people, in order to get what they wanted, just took it from the next tribe or took it from his neighbor or something like that. And the more people developed, I think this kind of goes with the same sense that the way to stop, if you think that global warming is a major problem, by the way, the poorest countries, you're trying to impose this worldview like solar and wind. And the problem you don't see, if that's what your main focus is, that all these poor people in these developing countries need fossil fuels, or they need nuclear energy or something, or that kind of thing. Like sustainable energy isn't going to sustain them because they're living hand to mouth. And if you impose solar or wind on them, their situation is going to get even more dire because their poverty is going to be even more embellished. So the way you fight, if you think that global warming is a problem and you want people to act more responsibly, especially in these developing countries, make them as rich as possible, as quickly as possible. So when you start to get more comfortable, you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, and you don't have to worry about a roof over your head. You start to contemplate other things like your environment or that sort of thing. So getting back to the development of society or the evolution of society, when you're talking about survival, when you're talking about, okay, well, we've found a great way to produce food, and that's farming, or that's, herding cattle, getting their milk, using their meat, that sort of thing. We've kind of developed that trade or that skill in the sense that we don't have to worry as much about food as our ancestors did. So we're a little more comfortable, and it's a lot of hard work, but we don't have to purge the next tribe for our food. We can grow it ourselves. We can raise it ourselves. As that became more evident that peaceful cooperation and peaceful activity was the way to go, I think the more people realize that you don't have to rely on violence to get what you want. In fact, cooperation helps you a lot more. And so I think that cooperation does not involve rape or murder or ransacking your neighbors, that sort of thing. So I think as society developed, the evolution of human interaction became such as we value nonviolence over violence, because that gets us closer to what we want. Whereas if we're violent, if I have to go purge my neighbor's house every time I need something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've got to look over my shoulder because he might do the same to me in revenge, or because now I took everything he has. And that's no way to live. Like, eventually you're going to have a short life if you've made it about violence and you leave yourself open to the possibility that somebody's going to perpetrate the same on you. Whereas voluntary cooperation, having, maybe it evolves into what you would call morality, but establishing the rules of society that rape is wrong, murder is wrong, and robbery is wrong, that sort of thing. So in the sense that, yes, God could be an explanation for all of that, I believe that human interaction and human cooperation also could be another possibility for that.
Right. Yeah. So that, I think that links back to what I'm talking about, or like, I guess, different orders of explanation, right? In one sense, we kind of have like approximate explanation. Okay, this is sort of how we came on the physical side to come to hold these moral beliefs. Then we have a deeper metaphysical explanation that helps us to see why these moral beliefs are not just something that we project, but something that is actually true and binding. Because we can look to the animal kingdom and see that we have patterns of evolution where there has been survival, right? With violence, right? It's not hard to discover these things, right? So right. I don't think we don't want to say that it's a sort of a necessary path or pattern of evolution that you had to have this sort of egalitarian cooperation, because you have many instances where that's not the case, right? But we still do think, as you're saying, and I think you're right? No, that this type of cooperation, this type of nonviolence actually is good, regardless of its survival value, even though it does have that clearly, but it actually is good in and of itself. And if somebody were to act contrary to this, say begin just harming innocent people, we wouldn't say that that's bad just because it frustrates survival. Like, we know say that that's actually bad, right? For a binding reason. So my approach to this is not even to argue against anything that you've said. I actually think it's fundamentally on point. Just to show that there's not a competitiveness here, and there's just like levels of explanation.
Yeah, I agree.
If it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, at least that was helpful for me, right? So much of the God question is trying, I think, to separate between levels of explanation, because whatever else God explains, God is on the level of a metaphysical explanation, right? We believe that God like really put an entire nature into operation, right? So we should be able to figure out and learn a lot about the world through science and natural investigation without having to like do God of the gaps type of stuff, right?
Right.
Now, ultimately, you have to, I think, answer these deeper metaphysical questions where then it's not, then there really is a God-sized hole that needs to be filled, right? But we don't, there's not really the God-sized holes in these physical explanations. So, I think that's all right. And for me, is thinking about, okay, are these explanations competitive or are they compatible? And then, of course, there's the deeper explanation of evolution itself, right? Whatever else evolution it's contingent upon physics, and physics has to sort of be just right, right? For the conditions of evolution. So in that sense, I think you're still going to need a deeper explanation of, well, what sets the conditions where patterns of evolution can even come about by all, and then you're just kind of into the fine tuning of physics, which I think has strong sort of theistic implications from there. Do you see the angle that? I'm not trying to like convince you. Maybe I am trying to convince you, John, but this is the sort of stuff that convinced me, if that makes sense, right? Of seeing that they're not competitive, and you actually get a sort of deeper, more satisfying explanation from the God hypothesis than its alternative.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Crimes and Misdemeanors. Why did you want me to watch that movie, which I loved, by the way?
Because just from all the conversations we had, like kind of like this one, where you're trying to find the origins of morality and what's good and what's evil. I thought that would be like the perfect movie for you to watch, because it's really on display right there. Because you have a guy who chooses whether or not there is a God, and if there is a God, then he has to face the fact that there is a set of morality. There's a set of morality, or I don't know what to call it, an actual structure of morality that he would have to follow if he accepts God in his life. So in the end, I don't know if we want to do the spoiler already, but
yeah, do it.
In the end, he chooses the one way, and he's able to go on with his life. So it's that question about morality, what's good and evil. And then you have his character, Judah Rosenthal, and you have Woody Allen's character kind of living their parallel lives, making different choices in life based on their moral foundations. And for Woody Allen, it doesn't turn out so well, whereas Judah Rosenthal, it works out pretty well for him. And when I recommended that to you, I kind of explained the premise, and I did say, well, remember, it's a Woody Allen movie, so in the end, it's going to be in favor of morality is subjective rather than from a higher power.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the details of the movie because I watched it once. I loved it. I know we had some back and forth on the Facebook conversation, and I think I remember the movie kind of being left. It was definitely left open at the end, right, where it seemed like the guy who committed the crimes kind of gets away with it, and then Woody Allen kind of doesn't get what he wants, and the idea is, well, look, this guy tried to do the right thing, but he kind of got the shaft at the end of the day. I remember thinking, however, and you've seen this movie much more than I have, and I don't know, and I know Allen himself is a sort of materialist type of dude, which is cool because he's a guy that like thinks deeply about these things and its implications. And I would argue he seems to be more consistent than most towards like a nihilistic type of outcome, right?
Right.
One thing that struck me is like whether he intended it or not, Woody Allen's character was not living a good life, right?
No, yeah.
He's still like cheating on his wife and doing like these immoral things. Right. So like at the end of the day, he doesn't kind of get what he wants, which was a particular girl. But that of course, like, yeah, the way I think about it is I think it was like the sort of ethics operative there is sort of like a minimalist, very thin, humanist type of ethics, right? Where like, as long as I'm not that Judah guy who's killing people, then I'm a good person.
He only
right?
killed one person.
He only killed one person,
and
right?
He didn't do it himself.
And he technically hires, and that was something that struck me as like, well, why should I accept that thin of a conception of ethics, right? From the way I see it, they're both bad. Judah might be worse, right?
Right.
But whatever Allen's character is doing, like, this is far from a virtuous life. You see what I mean?
Yeah, and there's a few characters in this. I mean, I can give the premise. The Judah is a ophthalmologist. He has an affair, a 2-year affair with this woman who, he tries to break it off with her. She goes a little nutso and obsessive about him. And long story short, is his brother is a not so nice character. He's in the criminal world, and he pays his brother to hire somebody to kill his mistress. And after that happens, the rest of the movie is him kind of struggling because he has a very religious upbringing, and he's kind of fighting with that upbringing. If there is a God in the universe, then he's violated it. And he's got to make a decision whether or not he's willing to accept that there is a God and confess to the crime, or decide that morality is subjective and he's going to go on living his life the best way he can. Right. But there's also Woody Allen's character, who's a documentary filmmaker, and like you said, he views himself as a very morally upstanding person who always tries to do the right thing. His brother-in-law is this very narcissistic television producer who everything always works out for him. He has a lot of money. He is responsible for a lot of successful shows, and just he's living the life that Woody Allen theoretically probably wants to live. Like, he wants to be successful, but he wants to do it as a moral documentarian who exposes the world for what it is, and
he's the true artist in his own eyes, right?
Exactly. And I think he's fighting becoming Alan Alda. Lester is the character's name. He's fighting, he's resisting being Lester. And I think that same struggle is going on with Judah, in the sense that he is struggling to discover, like, is morality subjective? Like, is he a moral person because he decides killing his mistress isn't gonna bother him, or is he a moral person because he finally accepts God, which he doesn't do? So I think there's a lot of representation of what's moral, what's just, what's good, what's evil, and you see it play out in a bunch of different kind of scenarios in this movie.
Yeah, that was a great summary. That reminds me now of many of the details. And what I like about Alan's style is he doesn't do all the thinking for you, right? He gives you scenarios, he gives you situations, but then he leaves a lot of things open for interpretation. Right. And not to switch subjects too much, but I know you're very much into the arts yourself, Jon. Something of an artist yourself is, to me, that is sort of good art, right?
Right.
That is good art, right? As opposed to all the just sheer propaganda nonsense we get today that just tells you exactly what you're supposed to think, rather than trying to get you to think deeply.
Or what's good art versus not good art.
Yeah, yeah, right. And what I really love about that movie is that, you've seen it many more times, but than I have. But I guess I could see it as lending itself to any number of different interpretations, which to me shows that Alan did a really good job.
Yeah, and I remember one part of your feedback was the person that he was doing the documentary about, that philosopher, the college professor, who eventually kills himself toward the end of the movie.
That's right, because he was a nihilist, thinking that you didn't need this sort of higher meaning in life.
Exactly.
And then I guess
but then he couldn't find meaning in life, so he killed himself.
He killed himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, dang it, like this guy was the guy who showed me that I could get through life without this higher meaning, and then he just offs himself. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Which is
his suicide note was, "I've gone out the window."
And of course the movie's deeply hilarious too, and it's just like it's so dark but so funny at the same. If people haven't
watched,
watched,
balance between humor and real deep subject matter. Yeah,
so if people haven't seen that movie, I can't recommend it enough. I have to thank Jon for getting me to watch it.
I know, like, people are like, "Oh, I'm not gonna watch a Woody Allen film. He's morally questionable or morally reprehensible." It's like, yeah, I get it, but for the sake of seeing a movie that really deals with this subject in a great way, I think you kind of have to disassociate the artist with the art.
100%. I mean, I think it like any sort of religious person should like this movie, because to me it goes to show, like, Alan's sort of really struggling with himself in this movie, right? He's like, here's my paradigm. It seems like my paradigm leads to this sort of nihilistic outcome, which I really don't like. But I also, I just think this is the world we live in. So here you go, right? And just tries to present it, right?
But he's also he's looking at the world in a realistic way. But the world he lives in has taught him that if you act like a good person, good things will happen to you. Right. Whereas his brother-in-law is proof that that's not the case. You can be a reprehensible person and get the girl in the end. So it's
right.
It's in Woody Allen's view. I don't think he believes that. I mean, ultimately, he comes to the conclusion that believing in God doesn't necessarily get you anything in this life that that makes you happy or fulfills you or whatever. Again, like, I think the way you behave in this life, to your point of view, would be the way you live in this life is going to count for you after you're gone. And it's going to determine where your place in the universe is after you leave the physical body. So I don't think he's thinking of it in those terms, at least his character isn't, but that's the argument you could make to his character.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's worth spending some time talking about, right? Because certainly from the traditional Catholic view, right? I mean, you do good things, good things will happen to you. That's not right. That's definitely not right.
And it could be right. I mean, if you're a good person,
right. So a funny way of framing this is, as you often know, Jon, we talk about sometimes, there's sort of the problem of evil. Well, why do bad things happen to anybody, but especially good people? But some of the earliest Christians actually held the reverse problem. They held the problem of good, right? Because they saw that this life was about attaining moral perfection, a certain character state, and that suffering could be sort of medicinal for that. Suffering can break down pride, ego comparativeness, superficiality, right? So they actually kind of struggle with the idea of, well, why does anything good happen to people? at all, right? Why
Right.
it was good, the problem of goodness, right? And it's been kind of like reversed in our modern understanding, but they really struggle with this idea of like, especially why do good things happen to good people, right? Like,
Right.
why isn't there more suffering to help us sort of achieve this state of moral perfection? Which goes to show like how alien our modern paradigm is, because from the certainly I'm just going to say the Catholic paradigm, because as I think you've come to see, John, Christians are across the board believe many different things, right? But from the Catholic paradigm, you have your existence that has essentially two segments, right? You have one very short segment, right? That's very important. And then you have one very long, everlasting segment, right? And whatever else this segment is about, it's about not getting things, right? But becoming something. That's what it's about. It's not about getting things, but becoming something, right? And using our freedom of choice to attain a sort of terminal freedom, a freedom for the absolute unlimited good, which is God, and having a union with that. And that requires a certain sort of moral perfection to have that union. And then, of course, we believe that because we're finite and fallible creatures, we fail morally, but God can sort of help us along the way through providential conditions, which often involve tremendous amounts of suffering, right? And this is when traditional Catholics understood this, is why they struggle with the problem of the good. Like, if suffering is so useful for this paradigm, then why isn't it just all suffering, right? And I think there's good answers to that, but I think it's also useful to show like how differently the tradition has thought about this than say somebody like Woody Allen, right? It really was a problem of why do good things happen, not just bad things happen. And so it's definitely not karma, right? If you just do good things, you're going to get good things in this life, because what God cares about is what you become ultimately, not what you get in this life, right? And so suffering can be seen as a sort of providential medicine for different aspects of your life. It could be to kind of get you to a point of justification where you actually realize that you can't do it all on your own. You do need God's help. You do need grace and all these other sort of theological things. But even after, and this is a critical point of Catholic teaching, is sort of even after you have faith, you should not just expect that the Lamborghini is going to come or all this other sort of prosperity gospel nonsense, right? The idea from the Catholic tradition is like, once you kind of come to faith in God, it's sort of like enlisting in the army. It's like, all right, you signed up now. Now you're after moral perfection, and you're going to get it good and hard, right? Which means like a sort of like thorough scrubbing, which often involves even more suffering, right? So this is so distant than I would say sort of Americanized Christianity, which, as I'm sure you're familiar with and disgusted by, John, like if you just do your prayers and read the Bible, God will give you the bigger house or something like that, right? This is just that's laughably absurd. That's not the Catholic paradigm. Like if anything else, if you become a sort of believing and professing and baptized and sacramental Christian, you might actually expect more suffering because of it, not less. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a point of contrast from where Woody Allen was coming, and get your thoughts on any of it.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, like, it just makes me think like, the people who think that as long as they're imposing Christianity on everybody, that means they're a good person. Like, I mean, look at the God hates fags people who protest outside of veterans' funerals.
Right.
I mean, why is it that you have to take your beliefs that far? Why is it that you are willing to ruin a very personal moment for an entire family and friend support system? To like, what is the end game? Are you going to convince those people that they should convert to the way you see the world? Second of all, I think like the suffering thing, I think just from a mental health thing, I think suffering is needed in your life so that you can appreciate the good parts, the good times. So like if you grew up in poverty and you eventually graduate high school, you graduate college, you get a good job, you kind of appreciate the lifestyle you've curated for yourself versus because you went through that whole 18 years of suffering or however long. So I think it's not only from a religious standpoint, but from, like you say, becoming a better person, understanding the difference between what the world could be, how bad it could be, and how good it can be, and how you should do what you can to make your life and maybe the life of others as good as possible.
Yeah. What was that first point you said? It just dropped out of my head. What was that first point again? Because I wanted to
the God hates fags people.
Yeah. All right. So I was actually just talking. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was just talking with a friend last night who is really in the process of becoming Catholic, from a Protestant paradigm, and he was talking about, it's always so hard in our culture today, to really kind of even talk about Christianity because of examples like that. And he also gave another example. It's like the person who refuses to leave a tip at a restaurant, but instead gives like a religious like pamphlet or something like that. It's like, man, what are you thinking? Right? Like you think like this person is ever going to take you seriously at that moment?
The waitress just has a bad association with
right. Like this person's a jerk, right? They just stiff me. And really, I would say they probably committed a really sinful act, because like, we know you have an obligation to take care of wait staff, right? And you've just like kind of thieved that person, right? So in what sense, like, are you even living towards any sort of correct moral standard anyways, right? And of course, it doesn't help that, like, the sort of secular forces that are maligned against Christianity, like, always like to represent Christianity, like, by those people, right? Let's bring on the Christian expert for our news segment today, and it's one of those people with the protest signs at the funeral, right?
Right.
Oh man, obviously, I agree with all that. I just thought it was ironic because
I think there's actually I just thought of one aspect of the movie that I think is really important, is that one of Judah Rosenthal's patients is a rabbi.
Yeah.
And the reason he's seeing Judah during the movie and in the different scenes is because he's going blind. And so if you remember, as long as the rabbi has sight, Ben, I think his name is, as long as Ben has sight, Judah is struggling with this. Now, in the end, Ben becomes completely blind. And that happens to be, when you find that out, it happens to be at the exact same time you find out that Judah has decided he's not going to let murder for hire bother him. So
he's lost his moral sight.
His only connection to God and the morality that God imposes on the world is now blind. You can't see what Judah's doing.
That is a really thank you for reminding me of that. That is a really significant point, because certainly in the tradition, right, we say that sin has sort of a dual effect. It makes you weak and it makes you stupid, right? And it can make you stupid to the point of almost becoming morally blind, right? That you can so like twist and deform yourself, that you almost become like stuck, right? And this is actually how Dante kind of depicts Satan in hell. He depicts him as like being frozen in ice, right? And I think that's kind of the same type of, like, you can reach a state of such depravity that it may be irreversible, right? And that's sort of the traditional notion of hell, right? That you become so sort of twisted onto yourself that, at least how the Catholic Church understands hell, is a sort of state of eternal self-willed loneliness and separation from God. So that's a really interesting point with that movie. I totally forgot about that, but that's a really cool parallel.
Yeah.
By the way, if any of the people who are tuning in live here have any questions for our religious expert Jon here, please send them in. We'll be happy to.
I only see one comment. I don't know if he or she is still on Catholic based.
Says, nice to meet you, Jon.
Yes. Nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, I'd like to have you on the channel more, Jon, because of course we talk all the time, and you're a man with a lot of good takes and opinions on things. You're somebody who's very deep in the libertarian world, right? So let's take a little shift. We talked a lot about religion for a while, and that is very fun and fruitful. Explain to us now, for however much longer we're going to go here, your I guess your political side of things, your political development, your political philosophy. Because my understanding was you're quite liberal for a time, right? And then you kind of veered towards the libertarian paradigm. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was probably my first 2 years or so of college, I was probably a liberal Democrat. But my father was always a Republican. He was very into economics. He taught economics at the University of Delaware for a little bit in night school. So, yeah, I just remember finding a book one time that he had bought called Bankruptcy 1995. And that kind of like disturbed me. And he talked to me about the debt and how that could, lead to the collapse of the dollar. And that would be really bad news for, everything, our entire way of life. So I just got it more into economics. And the more I got into economics, the more I realized how important it was and how backwards I thought now that the democratic policies were, of just giving stuff for free, welfare, minimum wage, higher minimum wages, that sort of thing. What turned me off about the Republican, ironically, not ironically, I guess, was the kind of like Christian based part of it, because back then you had like Newt Gingrich and a few others who were kind of like the I don't know, the religious right, I think they called them.
Yeah, the sort of like 90s evangelical.
Yeah.
That,
and
yeah.
I was like, I consider myself a Republican, but I was also like pro-choice and some, like a few other things that I don't align myself with anymore. So I kind of thought like, well, I just want people to be able to live their lives as free from government as possible. And so I found out about libertarianism. I became libertarian. And I was kind of like libertarian for most of the 1990s. And then George W. Bush was running for office. And I thought, hey, we got a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate. If we elect a Republican president, that's going to be great, because they're going to just repeal all these laws and they're going to reduce the size of government and get back
surprise.
And it didn't quite work out that way. So by the time Ron Paul came along in 2008 or 2007, really, when he was running the primaries, I had decided that like I can't really justify morally my association with Republicans anymore. So I went back to libertarianism. I got a lot more deeper into it, like the Murray Rothbard part of it, the Lou Rockwell, the Austrian School of Economics, that sort of thing. And then I eventually, after the 2012 Ron Paul campaign and the way they kind of screwed over him, I didn't think he was going to get the nomination, but the way they kind of really screwed him over just made me real, I guess, nihilistic about the political process. So eventually, a few years later, I just thought of myself as an anarcho-capitalist. I just decided to give up on the whole idea of government and felt that a voluntary society was more the way to go, and certainly a decentralized society. I'm not one of those idealists who thinks that we can have anarcho-capitalism tomorrow in America. I think it's going to be a process of, first of all, breaking the country up, secession, decentralization, realizing that we can't keep this monstrosity going much longer. And then just having different societies, different communities built to figure it out for themselves, which way they want to go. I'm sure you're going to find a lot of little Americas. The way America is run right now, it's just going to be a smaller region, and some people are going to be more libertarian. Some people are going to be more religiously based republicanism. I think we have to, my whole goal right now is to convince people that we need to separate, that we can't spend the rest of our lives 330 million people fighting with each other and screaming at our neighbors. And I think COVID has really exposed how deep the fissures are.
Right.
And how much we cannot share a political system with people who despise us on either side. I mean, like I look at people in mass now, I just retch, and it's because I know they're representative of something that I really abhor, and it's something that really sickens me, and it's this authoritarian COVID regime.
Right.
And I think the further I get away from these people politically, the better off we'll all be.
So this will be a good launch pad for future conversations, because me and Jim, who you haven't met yet, but he's his frequent co-host, want to start doing more on political philosophy. So you're going to be on the horn for the conversations we have on libertarianism and all that stuff. Before we go though, tell us about your projects. You have a number of different projects going on. You just kind of hinted at one, right?
Yeah.
And then you also have a wine and barbecue project. So let's get some word out about those.
Well, I guess when the COVID pandemic started, I don't know, like I had a hankering. I had a smoker before, but it was a propane smoker that crapped out on me, and I really liked the food that I was able to cook from smoking, but I was kind of frustrated with the propane part of it and like not working after about a year or so. So I got a charcoal griller. A charcoal smoker. And that kind of turned my whole world around. Like I just really got into smoking meat, and looking more into like that cuisine, that kind of culinary art, as it were. And now I own 3 smokers, and I'm really into wine. And so I decided, hey, I like wine, I like barbecue, and why don't I start a blog that talks about both? I talk about the food I cook and the wine I pair with it. And so anybody who's interested, if they want to go to winewithbbq.com, that's winewithbbq.com, and check out. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. Like, I'd like to turn it more into like a money-making thing. I guess I have to do some kind of videos or something like that, rather outside the blog. So, I do have Instagrams, I do have a Facebook page. So it's evolving as we speak.
Awesome. So link up with Jon, and Jon's he's an awesome generalist, right? So you're a video guy, you're a great writer, very, very, very funny. If people didn't pick up the sarcasm, it's all through Jon's life. Thinking about the deep issues. So always a joy to talk with you. I also want to show people like that's, it's important, I think. Obviously it's good to have disagreement and come to hopefully resolutions, and that when you have disagreement that you have more light than heat and stuff like that. But believe it or not, Pat Flynn actually doesn't live in a complete echo chamber. I mean, like my closest friends, Jon, I'm thinking of our sort of ongoing text message group. What do we have in there? We've got 2 Catholics, an agnostic, a Hindu, a Jew, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And like, we're and I think
we all share the same values.
There are core commitments, right? But it also shows, it makes me optimistic, right? That you can have really good conversations on deep issues like this one that are actually productive. And I need that reminder, because so much about today's society, as you've highlighted, is so shrill, it's so petulant, it's so shrieky, it's so authoritarian, and it's disgusting. So hopefully we've given a bit of a model of how maybe you can have productive conversations.
As long as you're starting from a place of good faith and really trying to hash out different arguments, I think that's the most important thing. And that's how you get along as a society. And I think the problem is now that there's a very large faction of society that just wants to shut all conversation down,
right,
and impose its worldview on the rest of society as much as possible.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you lose argument, what do you have? Well, you either have just like you ignore each other, or you use force and violence, right?
Yeah. Or do you think about what you just learned from that conversation? Or, if you're trying to convince other people of your argument and they're trying to convince you of yours, did you come away with learning anything, at least having a better understanding of the opposite view that you hold?
Yeah, very, 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 very good. All right, so we're gonna have you back on. This will be an ongoing conversation. This was fun, and we'll see if we can get Agnostic Jon to church yet. That'll be the mission this year. Get Jon to come to mass with us.
That'll literally be a miracle.
Hey, dude, I would have said the same thing, man. Like at a certain point. So, and I believe in miracles, so I'm willing to. That sounds good.
There you go.
Yeah, so awesome, Jon. Thank you so much. winewithbbq.com. Are you still running Peaceful Separation?
I am. I've just been too busy to deal with it.
That's fine. Yeah, we'll have you on to talk about that type of content.
Hopefully, when I move in the spring, knock on wood, I will be able to get back to it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. All right, and if you guys have anything you want us to talk about next time Jon comes on, just leave a comment on this video, and we'll be happy to make that a theme of our next jam session. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.